Christmas Wreath by Pamela Kennedy. The first December after we moved to Hawaii, it was a struggle to get into the holiday spirit. So I volunteered to help with the church Christmas decorations. On the appointed day, we met in the sanctuary, and the chairperson of the decorating committee explained the general strategy for assembling the half-dozen trees, 100 or so poinsettias, swags, candelabra, ribbons, lights, and wreaths. We got to work quickly while recorded Christmas music played softly, and laughter and conversation created a carnival-like chorus. It took us almost all day to complete the work, but the final effect was well worth the effort. Sparkling lights glimmered in evergreen boughs, crimson poinsettias blazed around the altar, and the center aisle was aglow with ribbons and balls of silver and gold. Then, just as we were ready to leave, one of the women opened a cardboard box and lifted a simple cane wreath from folds of tissue paper. Its appearance was not remarkable, but I noticed the reverence with which it was handled, as the wreath was centered on the front of the main pulpit. It seemed a bit out of place among the more ornate decorations. It had no ribbons, balls, or lights. In fact, its only adornment was about 100 small fabric rosebuds clustered along one half of the woven circle. They were the kind of small, cheap, artificial buds found in craft stores and usually used to decorate favors at weddings. "What's the significance of the wreath?" I asked a woman standing beside me. "Oh, it's your first Christmas here, isn't it?" she replied, smiling. "Wait until Christmas Eve. You'll find out then." I waited. On Christmas Eve, I showed up with my family in tow. Candlelight softened the sharp edges of the cross suspended over the altar, and the evergreen and poinsettias filled the air with spicy sweetness. When the string quartet began the strains of an ancient lullaby, even the tiniest members of the congregation quieted, and the hush of expectation spread over us all. Soon we were singing the familiar words of Christmas, "Joy to the world, hark the herald angels sing." But I was waiting for the explanation of the Christmas wreath. What could that simple circle mean in the midst of all this grandeur? The pastor spoke, and the choir sang. The children read the traditional scriptures from the Gospel of Luke. The service was almost ended when a young mother walked to the front of the sanctuary carrying a child and leading a little boy by the hand. She took her place behind a simple wooden podium, hitched the sleeping child up higher on her hip, and folded the little boy close to her side with her other arm. "Last Christmas," she began, "we each took a Christmas rose as the bunch was passed down our pew. I almost didn't let James take one because I didn't think he understood the purpose of the rosebuds. But it was Christmas, and I didn't want to make him unhappy." She stroked the silky brown hair on the little boy's head, and he looked up at her and grinned. "Well, I kind of forgot about the rosebud after Christmas. Work was demanding, being a parent was exhausting, and life seemed to rush along at a hectic pace. At the hospital, where I'm a nurse in the neonatal unit, we care for high-risk babies, and the stress takes its toll. Yet in the midst of all that busyness, there was a baby, a little boy, who seemed to draw my attention. He was weak and sick, and no one ever came to see him. I checked his chart and spoke with the doctor and learned that this little fella had been born with severe illnesses. Unable to help even herself, his mother had relinquished him to the care of the state. The little boy needed a family, but because of his health problems, he was an unlikely candidate for adoption. Day after day, whenever I had a free moment, I stood beside his crib, stroking his tiny arms and legs with my fingers, humming, "Jesus loves me," and willing him to get better. By March, little Jonathan, as we had named him, was strong enough to leave the hospital and go to a foster home, but I couldn't get him out of my mind or my heart. And so, after much prayer, I applied to adopt him. We brought Jonathan home last summer, and the evening of the first day with us, James brought me a tiny red rosebud and asked if I would send it back to Pastor Dan at the church. When I asked him why, he told me that Pastor had invited us each to take a rosebud on Christmas Eve and to let it remind us to pray for something that we could trust God to do, and that when our prayer was answered, to send it back with a note, and he would place that rosebud on next year's Christmas wreath to remind us all that God answers prayers. Then James handed me his rosebud and said simply, "I prayed for a brother." The young woman patted the chubby cheek of the child sleeping in her arms and said softly, "This is Jonathan," the answer to James' rosebud prayer. As the young mother returned to her seat, little girls dressed in their Christmas finery walked down the aisles, handing small bouquets of red rosebuds to the individuals seated at the end of each pew. The organ played Silent Night, and the bouquets were passed down the rows as each person removed a flower. As the service ended, the pastor reminded us of the hope shared that first Christmas and encouraged us each to have faith in the power of God to do great and wonderful things in response to our prayers. It might take a week, a few months, or even years, he said, but God is faithful, and we must be too. I left the service and tucked the rosebud into my purse. I knew just what I would pray about, and when my prayer was answered, I too would send my flower back to take its place upon the Christmas wreath in silent testimony to the power of God to hear and answer the prayers of his people.